Welcome to the Perspicacious Perspective. White privilege seems to have been around for a while now, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware of all the privileges that every single white person is afforded just for being born white, and more importantly, how to actually qualify for white privilege. Please excuse the sardonic tenor to my voice throughout the duration of this episode. If you're white, you might be thinking, what privileges? Which is exactly why I've decided to do an episode on white privilege, to make sure that if you do qualify, you're making the most of all the privileges that you've been afforded. First things first, to qualify, you need to make sure you are indeed white. To do this, you need 2 white parents, a white mother and a white father. Both your maternal grandparents need to be white, and both your paternal grandparents need to be white too. If any of your parents or grandparents aren't 100% white, you don't qualify for white privilege. If you don't know anything about one of your parents or grandparents, but every single one of your parents or grandparents you do know is white, then I've got good news for you. You might still qualify for white privilege. So let's go through the criteria you need to meet in order to qualify for white privilege. Criterion number 1. Be born in a predominantly white country. In order to reap the full benefits of white privilege, you need to be born in a country that is predominated by white people. That way, the majority of the people around you will understand your culture better. It's important for the majority of the people around you to understand your culture so they can figure out quickly what motivates you, how you're likely to spend your free time, and what your relationships with your family members look like. If the majority of the people around you won't be able to work these things out, you're likely to be discriminated against by the minorities you're living around, and the white culture that predominates the country you're living in won't be able to offer you the preferential treatment you deserve, especially in the corporate world. Criterion number 2. If you're born in a predominantly white country, don't be born in an area that has a high demographic of ethnic minorities. Think about it. It defeats the purpose of white privilege. How can you enjoy the privileges of having the majority race of the country you're living in around you if you live in an area that's predominated by another race? You're going to be more likely to adopt the norms and customs of the minority ethnicity. You're going to be more likely to have compassion for these minority groups. And living amongst minority groups means you're more likely to have your pure white culture defiled. If this is the case, when it comes to other white people trying to understand you, it'll be harder, since there's now aspects of your culture that they won't understand or be able to figure out. So that increases the chances you'll be discriminated against by your very own race. Plus, if you decide to continue living amongst minority communities, they're probably going to discriminate against you for the same reasons. Criterion number 3. Be born in an area that has low crime rates. If you're born in an area that has relatively high crime rates, you're more likely to grow up in a single parent household, you're more likely to be lured into organised crime, you're more likely to become addicted to drugs, you're less likely to grow up with a good education, you're less likely to become legally employed, and you're less likely to live around other white people. Criterion number 4. Be born to 2 white parents. And it's okay if one of your parents is a step-parent. Just make sure they're white. And make sure that there's 2 of them. Make sure none of your parents have a criminal record, or you'll lose your access to white privilege for obvious reasons. Make sure none of your parents are addicted to drugs, and make sure your parents can afford to send you to a private school. If they can't afford to send you to a private school, make sure at least one of your parents is educated well enough to be able to homeschool you and teach you everything you need to know in order to thrive in the society. And the final and most important criterion you need to meet to qualify for white privilege, make sure at least one of your parents or grandparents have assets you will inherit when they die. Remember, we didn't choose to be here. We're here because of our parents and grandparents, so it's their responsibility to set us up financially for life. Make sure your parents can afford to buy you your first car by the age you're legally allowed to drive, and make sure they can afford to pay the down payment for your first home. Because of the cost of living and all that. So those are the 5 criteria you need to meet in order to qualify for white privilege. Have you met them all? No, probably not. If you have, you're just an extremely privileged white person, and you probably already know it. Did you notice, for all the criteria listed, you could just change the word white and you would become an extremely privileged black person or Asian person? Did you notice that all these privileges are privileges you'd probably want for your own children or grandchildren? Should your children or grandchildren be punished because you were able to provide them with these privileges? I know for a fact that most people who end up listening to this episode don't meet all 5 criteria. So let's go back through them. So the first criterion was about being able to live in the country your parents and grandparents grew up in. It's a privilege wherever you are in the world. People only leave their home country due to war, oppression, poverty, or economic opportunity. If your parents didn't have to leave their home country because they knew you'd be guaranteed peace, relative freedom, and economic opportunities, it's a privilege whether you're English, American, Indian, Chinese, Nigerian, or even Mexican, to be able to live and thrive in your home country. Since wealth is divided more unevenly in developing countries, that leaves masses of people who have scarce economic opportunities, which is why they decide to emigrate to other countries. So of course white people in America, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand are gonna appear more privileged because they were born in a country that their family have had at least 2 generations to build stability and wealth. And you're probably only looking at the top percentile of the population. In the UK, 10% of the population hold nearly 49% of all wealth in Great Britain. In the US, the top 1% of households hold 31% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% own just 2.6% of the wealth in the USA. In Canada, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand, the top 10% hold around 60 to 70% of the wealth in those countries, while the bottom half only holds around 2 to 5% of the wealth in those countries. So to claim that most white people are privileged is simply untrue. Most white people, according to these numbers, are in fact not privileged. In India, the top 1% of the country holds around 40% of the wealth, and the top 10% holds around 65% of the wealth in the country. In China, the top 10% holds around 67% of the wealth in the country. In Nigeria, the top 1% earn about 37 times more than Nigerians in the bottom 50% of the country, and the top 10% own well over 70% of the wealth in Nigeria. And in Mexico, the top 10% own 78.7% of the wealth in that country. So who's more privileged? The top 10% of Nigerians, Indians, Chinese, and Mexicans in their own country, or a white guy from the bottom 50% of the USA, Canada, the UK, Ireland, Australia, or New Zealand? Make it make sense. White privilege is a lie. The second criterion was about being born in an area with a high demographic of minority ethnicities. Most people want to own homes in neighbourhoods where their neighbours share the same cultural norms and values as them. If white people live in areas where there's large demographics of minority communities, that should tell you that they're not that privileged, as their parents likely aren't wealthy enough to choose a more affluent area for their child to grow up in. Not to say that all parents would be opposed to it, but from their point of view, it would just be easier for their children to play together, go into each other's homes, and to build a community of shared interest from. The same thing could be said about affluent areas in India, Nigeria, China, or Mexico. To be able to choose what kind of neighbourhood you want to live in is a privilege, and those with money are going to choose neighbourhoods where there is a threshold of wealth people have to be able to live in the area. Because the West is predominated by white people who have been there longer than other ethnicities, it's inevitable there will be more affluent areas exclusively populated by white families. The third criterion was about being born in an area that has low crime rates. Why would any white people in the West choose to raise children in an area that has relatively high crime rates? It reminds me of a joke Theo Von made. Theo Von's a white American comedian if you don't know him. It was after one of his black neighbours claimed he had white privilege. He said to him, "Why would he do all this shit to you, then move right next door?" He said, "White privilege? Man, I missed that one." For white privilege to be true, wouldn't every single white person have to be able to enjoy the privileges? This is my argument. The fourth criteria was about being born to 2 white parents. Being born to 2 parents who have no criminal record and aren't addicted to drugs is a privilege in itself, irrespective of the race of your parents. That's just due to human nature. The pleasure of sex happens to be so good that it means thousands of people have unplanned kids to sexual partners that don't stick around to raise the children. In the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland, between 16 to 19% of families have children that are raised in a single parent household. And that doesn't even include children who are put up for adoption or are raised by step-parents. That means it's a privilege to be raised by 2 functional parents who actually wanted you. If your parents are then stable enough financially to afford to send you to a private school, then you're privileged, not to mention those with parents who are educated enough to homeschool their children themselves. If any parent could choose to send their children to private school, they simply would. Have you seen the state of most of the public schools in the West? Plus, money talks. If your teachers are incentivized to ensure you get good enough grades to pursue a lucrative career, they'll work harder to support you with achieving those grades. If they're not incentivized, I'm sure a lot of teachers would happily watch you fail as you struggle through your exams. Education doesn't exclusively come from school either. Education is everything your parents can afford to expose you to. Educated parents will want their children to be exposed to the kinds of things that will enrich your culture capital. That's why rich parents are happy to send their kids on vacation as much as they can, to build their culture capital and to learn to understand what the world is like. When your parents choose which area to live in, they're simultaneously choosing the kind of people and the kind of culture they want you to be exposed to, as this will shape who you will become. It's the same case with schools. That's why there's religious schools, as the parents want their children to be exposed to other families with children who share the same philosophy. So when it comes to private education, it's no surprise that parents are willing to pay thousands to ensure their children are raised in an environment that's befitting of their values and philosophy. If you send your kids to a public school, you run the risk of sending your kids to a school where the parents have potentially neglected their children's education. That could mean other parents might have different attitudes towards violence, the role of women in society, the role of parents in society, sexuality, race, religion, and so forth. I mean, if you could choose, would you want your children to be hanging out with the children of, let's say, violent parents with outdated views on women in our society? Or would you prefer your kids to be hanging out with the children of parents who are taking their kids on holidays to the south of France every summer? I'm just saying, it does matter where you choose to send your kids to school. The fifth criterion was related to assets that you'd be extremely privileged to inherit when your parents or grandparents die. Now, we don't choose what families we're born into, unfortunately. That's just the nature of the game, which does have a name, by the way. We call it natural selection. Sure, globally, people have done some fucked up things in the past to compete for land and resources, but we can see the same kind of behaviour in other species as well, as they compete to mate, climb the social hierarchy, acquire access to resources, and survive. I say this to say that it's unfair to bear resentment for people who are born into wealth. The unique quality that Homo sapiens have is that we have the capacity to perceive the future. That's what explains the incredible civilizations humans have built collectively over time. Because we understand and are capable of perceiving the future, it's also human nature for parents and grandparents to want to leave their fortune to their kids and grandkids. I mean, would you want the wealth you've built over a lifetime to go to the government, or to some stranger who won't appreciate what you had to go through to obtain that wealth? That means the most equitable thing to do is to allow people to leave their wealth to their children or grandchildren. So if you're born into a family that's wealthy enough to buy your first car or to buy your first house, you're simply privileged. If you're born into a family that's passed down debt, strife, hardship, and trauma like me, who knows, maybe you're a cunt in your past life. All jokes aside, white privilege is a myth. It's an attempt to collectively penalise a group of people who have had very little to do with the misfortune many in the West are subjected to because of history. It's an attempt to evade the simple truth that you have to work hard to enjoy the privileges you're coveting. It's an attempt to bypass the decades of struggle you'll have to be subjected to build the kind of wealth that privileged people can enjoy. The truth is, the kinds of privileges that people ascribe to white people in the West are actually privileges enjoyed by other cultures in other countries as well. It just seems unfair because you're living in the West. So if you're invested in the white privilege leftist propaganda, you need to do things that change your perspective, like read or travel, because the fact is, you have a warped and insulated perspective of the world. If you compared the privileges white people have in their home countries to the privileges brown people have in their own countries, you'd realise quickly that the white countries attempt to even out the playing fields far better than the brown countries do, which is exactly why everyone's emigrating to the West, not the brown countries, because the white countries offer better economic opportunities to its citizens than the brown countries do. It's so much easier for a foreigner in America to build wealth than it is for a foreigner in China to build wealth. I had the privilege of living in China for 5 years, and the Chinese don't even hide the fact that Chinese citizens have privileges that foreigners don't. If you're not Chinese, You can't buy investment properties in China. You're not allowed to open a business or invest freely. You're not allowed to visit Tibet or Xinjiang. And your movement around the country is restricted, meaning hotels are allowed to refuse your service. Try being a Karen in China. They'll just laugh at you. Majority race privilege exists everywhere. It's not just the West. There's nothing unique about the privileges white people have in countries their parents and grandparents were born in. I suggest you divert your focus from the privileges other people seem to have to privileges you can bestow upon your children and grandchildren. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, subscribe and check out my other episodes. Peace out.